The first thing my body wanted was motion. Run. Throw yourself off the tracks, break the spell, but my legs didn't obey. They felt rooted, nailed into the gravel, as if the rails themselves had decided I belonged here for a while longer. The lights above pulsed brighter, dimmer, brighter again, like a slow heartbeat suspended in the trees. The shape behind me did not breathe. I couldn't hear anything from it at all. No inhale, no shifting weight, just presence. The air around my neck turned colder, as though something leaned close without touching. The smell changed, sharp, metallic, like rain on rusted iron, and something older beneath it. Something that reminded me of wet soil freshly turned over. The figure ahead remained on the tracks, still pointing. Its arm stayed raised, unwavering, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. The whisper spoke again, softer now, intimate. Don't look too fast. My throat tightened. Why? A pause. Then, because it doesn't like being seen. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to turn my head, to confirm what stood behind me, to give shape to the terror. But the warning settled into my bones. Whatever was at my back wasn't a normal thing waiting to be discovered. It was something waiting to be acknowledged. The tapping returned. Tap, tap, tap. Not footsteps now, not walking, circling, slowly pacing the perimeter of my awareness. The lights above began to drift, almost imperceptibly as if drawn by invisible strings. They moved through the branches in tiny arcs, repositioning themselves, tightening their arrangement. A ring. No, a cage. The gravel shifted to my left. A crunch so small it shouldn't have mattered, but it did, because the sound came from something that was too close. The whisper breathed into my ear. Stay still. My eyes flicked sideways. Between two tree trunks, just beyond the tracks, I saw it. A face, not fully formed. A suggestion of pale skin suspended in darkness, like moonlight caught on fog. Features hovered in and out, eyes that weren't quite eyes. A mouth that seemed unfinished, like someone had tried to carve a human expression and stopped halfway. It stared at me without blinking. I felt my stomach drop. That wasn't the one ahead. That wasn't the one behind. That was another. The lights above brightened sharply, and for a moment the forest was revealed in harsh detail. Bark textures, scattered leaves, the faint glint of rail spikes, and silhouettes, more than two. Shapes standing between trees, half hidden, upright and long, watching silently as if they'd been there the whole time. My lips trembled. How many? The whisper answered with something that wasn't a number. Enough. The figure ahead finally lowered its arm, slowly, carefully. Then it took a step forward. Tap. The one behind me shifted, not closer, just angled, as if preparing. The lights pulsed faster now, their glow flickering like nervous breath. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps multiplied, overlapping, surrounding me in a rhythm that felt ritualistic. It wasn't chaos, it was coordinated. I realized with dawning horror that this wasn't a hunt. It was a reenactment, something that had happened here before, something the tracks remembered. The memory that wasn't mine returned in fragments, a lantern swinging wildly, a voice shouting down the line, a man stumbling, desperate, looking back over his shoulder. The sensation of being chased by something that didn't need to run. The taste of panic so thick it was like blood. I gasped and clutched my chest, trying to fight off fear flooding through me. The whisper murmured, "It always happens the same way." My voice cracked. "What happens?" Silence. Then, the crossing. The word hit me strangely. Crossing. Not just a place, a moment, a threshold. The lights above suddenly rose higher into the branches, lifting their glow upward, illuminating the tops of the trees. The ground beneath me darkened as if the world was inverting. The tracks ahead brightened into that pale opening again, wider now, closer, as though distance had collapsed. The figure on the rails stood at the edge of it, framed by that unnatural glow like a silhouette cut from night. And then, impossibly, it spoke aloud. Its voice was not one voice. It was layered with others, like many mouths speaking through the same throat. "You came back." My blood turned to ice. "I've never been here," I whispered. The figure tilted its head. A pause. Then, "Not you." The lights above flared violently, and in that instant, the memory sharpened into clarity. I saw it. A man running these tracks decades ago, his face streaked with sweat and fear, his shoes slipping on gravel, and behind him, lights in the trees, whispers in the dark, the same circle closing, the same ritual, the same ending. My knees buckled. I wasn't just standing on haunted ground. I was standing inside something unfinished. The whisper returned, almost tender. "It wants to complete it." I shook my head, tears stinging in my eyes. Complete what? The footsteps stopped, all at once, absolute stillness. Even the lights froze in place. The figure ahead lifted its arm again and pointed, not beside me this time, not behind me, straight down the tracks, toward the pale opening, the crossing, and the whisper, so close it felt like lips against my ear, said, "Go." I didn't move, not at first, because the word "go" didn't feel like an instruction. It felt like a sentence being carried out. It felt like a sentence being carried out. The pale opening down the tracks shimmered faintly, as if the air itself had thinned there, stretched too tight. The rails led into it like lines drawn to wood and eraser, and the figure ahead remained frozen, arm extended, patient as stone. Behind me, the presence did not press closer. It didn't need to. It already had me. My breath came shallow, trembling. I could hear my heartbeat louder than anything else, thudding in my ears like a warning drum. The woods held their silence so completely it felt unnatural, like sound had been taken away on purpose. I whispered, barely able to shape the words, "What is that place?" The whisper answered slowly, "Where the track forgets what it was." My stomach tightened. "That doesn't make sense." A pause. Then, "It doesn't have to." The lights above pulsed once, brighter than before, and for a moment the trees seemed too tall, leaning inward as though listening. I stared at the opening. It wasn't a tunnel. It wasn't fog. It was absence, a thin tear in the night where the world looked slightly wrong, like a photograph that had been smudged. The figure ahead finally lowered its arm and began walking. Tap, tap, tap. Each step rang on the rails with an echo that lasted too long, stretching behind it like a trail. And the lights followed. They drifted overhead in slow formation, keeping pace like lanterns escorting something sacred. My throat went dry. The silhouettes between the trees shifted subtly, not stepping forward, but turning, tracking the movement like an audience watching a procession. The ritual continued, and somehow, the worst part was that nothing felt rushed, no violence, no sudden attack, just inevitability. The whisper spoke again. It will be easier if you don't fight. My voice broke. I'm not going in there. The presence behind me changed, not closer, just attentive, like something had smiled without a mouth. The gravel beside my boot crunched. I realized with horror that my foot had moved on its own. A half step forward, my body betrayed me. I tried to pull back, and the air resisted, not like a wall, like thick water. The space around me had become heavy, syrupy, making motion away from the tracks feel impossible. The whisper softened. It's already started. The lights flickered rapidly now, their glow stuttering through the branches like nervous eyes blinking. Ahead, the figure reached the edge of the pale opening. It stopped, turned, and for the first time I saw something beneath its silhouette. Not a face, not features, but depth, as if inside it was not flesh, but a hollow corridor of darkness leading somewhere far away. It raised its hand again, curling two fingers inward, a beckoning gesture. Come. The cold around my neck tightened. My lips trembled. Why me? The layered voice answered from ahead, echoing strangely, because you heard us. I shook my head. I didn't want to. You listened. The whisper at my ear murmured, most people don't. I remembered then, not tonight, earlier, weeks ago, reading about the Gurdon Light, watching shaky videos, laughing at comments, skeptically amused, but deep down, fascinated, inviting it, in the careless way people invite storms by naming them. I had carried the idea here. And ideas I was beginning to understand were doors. The figure stepped backward into the pale opening. Half of it vanished, not hidden, gone, like it had crossed into a different layer of night. It extended its arm from within that absence, still beckoning. Tap, tap, tap. Behind me, the footsteps returned, closer now, surrounding, not frantic, ceremonial. The silhouettes in the trees leaned forward, barely perceptible, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. My voice felt stolen. The whisper spoke, almost kindly. It doesn't take you by force. My eyes burned with tears. Then how? It takes you by agreement. My breath hitched. No. A pause. Then, yes, because my feet were moving, slowly, against my will, but not entirely. Step, step. The rails guided me forward like grooves carved into fate. The pale opening grew larger, swallowing the darkness around it. The air there smelled different. Not forest, not rust. Something sterile, like old rooms shut for decades. The lights above lowered, descending with me, tightening into that ring again. A crown, a cage. The layered voice spoke once more, softer now, almost satisfied. This is where it ended. My throat tightened, and where it begins again. I reached the edge. The absence hummed faintly, not a sound but a vibration under my skin, as if my bones recognized it. I looked down. The tracks disappeared into nothing. No ground, no certainty, just that pale, waiting wrongness. The whisper breathed. One more step, and behind me, the presence finally touched, not with a hand, with cold, a pressure against my back like winter itself, gently, firmly, guiding. I stood trembling on the threshold, tears fall silently into the gravel, and the lights above flared, as if the forest was watching me choose. I froze at the threshold. The pale opening stretched before me like a wound in the night, deeper than my eyes could follow. The rails vanished into nothingness, leaving only the gravel beneath my boots and the ring of hovering lights ahead. They weren't just illuminating, they were framing. defining the edge of a place that should not exist. The whispers had grown faint now, layered but subtle, like a memory leaking through the air. I could feel them pressing against the edges of my mind, urging me to understand, to surrender. The presence behind me pressed just enough to remind me it was there, patient, unyielding, cold, not threatening in a way that demanded fear, threatening in a way that demanded attention. I realized then that I was not being chased, I was not being hunted, I was being invited or perhaps tested, and the knowledge that I was being watched completely, entirely, left me trembling. Step by step, my body betrayed my fear. My feet lifted off their own violation, drawn forward toward the pale glow. Each step echoed faintly against the rails that disappeared, clinking softly over the gravel as if the forest itself had agreed to record every moment. The lights above moved with me, adjusting, swirling in low arcs, forming a halo of spectral attention. The shadow on the tracks ahead, that featureless figure, had not moved but for the faintest tilt of its head, its gestures measured, deliberate. I tried to speak, my voice catching in my throat. What is this? The whisper came from everywhere now, layered, omnipresent. This is the crossing. I choked on the word. Crossing. A pause. The lights pulsed once, brighter, like the blink of an eye, between what was and what is, between what leaves and what remains, between life and memory. A shiver ran through me. The air itself felt thicker here, as if resisted my movements. The hairs on my arms stood up, the temperature seemed, and beneath me the gravel shifted faintly, not with wind, not with my steps, but as if something beneath the earth moved in perfect time with the lights above. Tap, 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 metallic, rhythmic, unyielding. I swallowed hard and took another step. The figure ahead didn't move toward me. It simply existed, an anchor for the moment, pointing the way, framing the opening with its presence. The lights overhead flared higher, illuminating the tops of the trees, revealing the forest around me in unnatural clarity. The shadows that had stood in the periphery shifted, stretching, leaning inward, like a crowd waiting for performance to begin. And then the whisper came again, intimate and deliberate. One step. That is all you need. I looked behind me. The presence, that unseen weight, pressed again, reminding me I was not alone, reminding me I had no choice but to participate. My pulse hammered, my mind screamed, yet I realized something terrifying. I wanted to step. As much as I wanted to flee, part of me ached to cross, to see what waited on the other side of the rails that had dissolved into nothing. The pale glow ahead seemed to pulse in response, almost sentient, breathing in tandem with my hesitation. I could see faint distortions within it, ripples in the air that hinted at forms, movements just beyond clarity. The featureless faint, motionless, yet somehow beckoning, guiding, promising revelation or doom, or perhaps both. A shudder passed through me. I took the first full step into the opening. The gravel disappeared entirely beneath my foot, replaced by a sensation of walking on cold air. My body felt weightless, suspended, yet tethered to the path I had chosen. The lights above tightened, surrounding in a halo, guiding my steps. I glanced down and saw nothing, no tracks, no ties, just emptiness reflecting the ghostly glow. The whisper, soft but urgent, breathed into my mind. You have begun. Now, see. Ahead, the figure's form seemed to ripple as if the air itself bent around it. revealing fragments of movement beneath its skinless outline, shadows of feet walking, hands reaching, mouths opening in silent screams. I blinked, trying to adjust. The visions were fleeting, half-formed, but their impact was absolute. They spoke of repetition, of ritual, of something that had been happening here long before I had arrived. The presence behind me pressed again, a cold insistence, reminding me I had no retreat. And I understood with a sickening clarity. This crossing was not just a place, it was a memory, a living memory of every soul who had ever wandered too far, who had stared into the lights and been seen, and now I was part of it. The first step was disorienting. The gravel beneath me had vanished entirely, replaced by a sensation like walking on liquid glass. Solid, yet unstable. My balance fought against me, but the presence behind me, patient and unyielding, kept me tethered. The lights above swirled gently, circling, forming a cage that glowed white, hot against the night's inky black. Each pulse of their illumination felt alive, like lungs breathing, like a heartbeat externalized. I realized with a sinking horror that the light itself was conscious, aware of me, watching my every movement. The featureless figure ahead had stepped fully into the pale void, its arm lowering slightly as if granting me permission, or perhaps confirming that my crossing was now unavoidable. The air here was heavy, vibrating faintly with a resonance that seemed to come from the ground beneath. The tracks that were no longer there, the forest that now felt like a distant memory. Every breath I drew was icy, tasting faintly of iron, like the blood I imagined pumping faster than it had ever in my life. And then I saw them, the shadows. Not just one, not just the featureless figure, but dozens, flickering, half-formed, upright and wrong. Some moved between the trees, gliding silently, some hovered faintly above the ground. They weren't stepping, they were hovering in the very air, bound by rules I could not comprehend, and yet the light circled them as well, illuminating, acknowledging, creating a network of attention that made me feel small, exposed and impossibly visible. I tried to step backward, just one step, and found that the air itself had resisted. It wasn't a wall, not solid. It was a slow, viscous pressure, like pushing through water with the weight of centuries pressing down. The whisper returned, gentle but absolute. You cannot leave until you see. I swallowed. I see what? The featureless figure did not answer in words. It tilted its head toward the emptiness of the pale opening. I understood that this wasn't a place to run. This was a place to witness, to absorb, to become part of. The lights pulsed faster, the circle tightening, and I could feel my own heartbeat echoing in time with them. Fragments began to appear within the void, shapes, movement, shadows of people walking the tracks long ago, a man slipping, falling, a lantern swinging wildly in panic, the sound of footsteps, muffled screams, whispers that weren't my own but that I now recognized as memory. I realized with a cold certainty that the Gurdon Light was not just a light, it was history. It was repetition. It was memory given form. The presence at my back pressed slightly, not violently, not threatening, but insistently, like a parent guiding a child into something terrifying but necessary. My legs moved of their own volition, following the pale path, and with every step, more of the void revealed itself. Forms became clearer, but never fully. Faces incomplete, hands elongated, eyes that were hollow yet aware. They were trapped in some eternal ritual, reliving the crossing over and over, each soul contributing to the weight of the moment. I tried to speak, to ask again, but words failed me. My voice was swallowed by the hush of the forest and the press of the presence. Instead, I could only walk, compelled by the figure, the lights, the whispers. Each step forward made the air heavier, the glow brighter, until it felt as though the night itself was bending, compressing, waiting for me to acknowledge what it had always known. This place was alive, and now so was I. The more I moved forward, the more the void seemed to expand around me. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was alive with echoes. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, flickering in ways that defied logic, half human, half something else. Some moved like memories replaying themselves, desperate, panicked, while others hung suspended, patient and watchful, as if observing my every reaction. The lights above pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, or perhaps with the rhythm of this place itself. I could no longer tell which was mine and which was not. The featureless figure ahead remained the constant. Its presence was an anchor, guiding me forward with that same deliberate patience. Yet, the deeper I stepped, the more the sense of being surrounded grew. Behind me, that other presence pressed closer, though never physically, never touchingly. It was a weight in the air, an undeniable pressure that told me, "You belong here now." The whisper returned, layered, omnipresent, insistent. "You see it now, don't you?" I, I don't know what I am seeing, I managed to whisper, trembling. "You always know. That is the nature of the crossing," it replied. Ahead, forms continued to emerge, flickers of people who had once walked these tracks, lanterns swinging in panic, eyes wide with fear, mouths open in silent screams, and yet they were not merely memories. They were trapped, bound to the rhythm of the Gurdon Light, bound to this corridor of shadow and illumination that refused to let them leave. Every step I took made the shadows shift, rearranging themselves like pieces on a board I could not understand, like the forest itself was alive and watching, a sentient audience to a ritual that had played out countless times. I realized then, with a chill that seeped into my bones, that the Gurdon Light wasn't simply a light. It was a mechanism, a recorder, a witness. It captured attention, memory, fear, and them to the tracks. And I, because I had become here willingly, because I had looked too closely, was now a part of it. The featureless figure extended its arms slightly, pointing forward into the pale opening. The whispers pressed against my mind in tandem, urging, coaxing, but not forcing. My feet, again, obeyed of their own volition. I couldn't stop them even if I had wanted to. Even every step forward carried me deeper, and yet, paradoxically, the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, folding into itself in impossible ways. The forest disappeared behind me. The tracks ahead were no longer just rails. They were a spine, a conduit, a bridge between what had been and what would always be remembered. Then, in the silence between heartbeats, I heard it, a faint whisper, intimate, insistent, directly in my mind. "Now, you witness, you understand, you are part of the story." And suddenly the pale opening pulsed brighter, revealing glimpses of the crossing itself, figures moving, falling, being enveloped by the light, faces contorted with fear, desperation, wonder, awe, shadows stretched and compressed in ways that made no sense. The air thrummed with vibration, the lights above adjusted their circle, and I realized that the Gurdon Light was not static. It responded, reacted, anticipated. It wanted recognition, it wanted participation, and now it had me. I stopped for the briefest moment, heart hammering, breath shallow. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the air around me would not allow it. The presence behind me hummed softly, a cold, omnipresent insistence. I understood, horrifyingly, that the only choice was to continue, to walk further into the void, to witness, to become part of this living memory, and then the whispers layered together in one coherent voice. Step fully, cross completely, become what you sought to see. The lights above flared violently. The shadows below danced with unnatural clarity, and the featureless figure began moving forward again, slowly, deliberately, beckoning me deeper into the crossing. Every nerve in my body screamed in terror and awe, but I stepped forward, and the Gurdon Light responded. The final steps were the hardest. Every part of me resisted, yet every part of me obeyed. The void ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, folding and unfolding in impossible ways like the night itself had been rewritten. My feet moved across nothing, guided by instinct, the figure ahead and the unseen weight pressing behind me. The pale opening pulsed gently, its light now warmer, now comforting, but purposeful, like it had a rhythm, a destination, and I was being carried along. The shadows that had haunted the periphery throughout the journey now gathered closer, drifting nearer the tracks like witnesses waiting for the conclusion of a long, ancient ritual. Some flickered in and out of form, others became almost tangible, their elongated limbs brushing against the edge of perception, as if attempting to communicate, to warn, or perhaps to welcome. The forest itself seemed to lean in, every branch, every tree, every hidden corner contributing to the collective attention that had been building since I first arrived. I realized with a strange, hollow clarity that I was not crossing to escape. I was crossing to see, to witness, to acknowledge what had always existed here. The figure ahead paused at the center of the pale opening, standing as both guide and sentinel, its arm lowered, then lifted again in that same deliberate, beckoning gesture. Step by step, I obeyed, drawn forward by curiosity, fear, and the magnetic inevitability of the ritual. The whisper returned, softer now, layered like a chorus. Every observer becomes part of the memory. Every eye that sees strengthens it. You have come willingly, you will leave, changed. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my body trembling, yet a strange exhilaration surged through me. I could feel the light, the air, the shadows themselves acknowledging my presence, folding me into the rhythm of the crossing. The figure ahead slowly dissolved into the pale glow, its form becoming one with the void, and with it I glimpsed the countless others, souls caught in the cycle, walking the tracks, suspended between worlds, forever observed, forever observing. The lights above pulsed once, brighter than before, illuminating everything in stark, ethereal clarity. The shadows below shifted, creating a living tapestry of movement and absence. I realized that the Gurdon Light was not a phenomenon to be explained, captured, or escaped. It was an event, a living memory, a consciousness made of fear, curiosity, and attention, and I had become part of it. As I took the final step into the pale opening, leaving the gravel and tracks behind, the whispers faded, replaced by a silence so deep it felt infinite. And yet, in that silence, I could sense the rhythm of the crossing continuing around me, alive, patient, and eternal. I was no longer merely a visitor. I was part of its story, woven into the light, the shadows, and the forest that had waited for me all along. And in the stillness that followed, I understood what the Gurdon Light had always been waiting for: witnesses, observers, souls who dared to see. I had crossed, and I would never be the same.